My name is Nate Mercer, and for a while I ran errands the church pretended didn't exist. If you walked past the brownstone on New Hampshire Ave, in DuPont Circle, you'd never look twice. There's a pretzel shop on the corner, a dentist with a glass smile 2 doors down, and one little brass plate at eye level that says administrative logistics in a font that could put you to sleep. If you pressed the buzzer, a camera blinked awake. If you said the right name, the lock would release with a sound like swallowing. Inside, it smelled like paper, ozone, and sanitizer. Climate control set to museum. We called it the pantry like we stored something edible there. We didn't. At least nothing any normal body should eat. It was a Tuesday that started the way good Tuesdays do. Coffee that tasted like someone had thought about coffee near hot water. Inbox stacked but conquerable. Sneakers still damp from the morning run. At 9:17 I got the text, office. That was Father Alvarez's entire style guide, single words, no emojis, a man who believed punctuation was a moral failing. He didn't look at me when I came in. He looked at the refrigerator. If you've never seen a priest in a collar and a Patagonia vest frown at a laboratory fridge like it owes him money, you're not missing much until you are. Close the door, he said. Then lock it. I did both, and the heavy latch thunked like something settling in a coffin. Alvarez pulled a small drawer with gloved hands, set a black leather pouch on the desk blotter, and stepped back the way you step back from a sleeping dog you don't actually trust. The pouch was the size of a paperback, matte leather, no zipper, sealed with red wax stamped with an emblem I didn't recognize, not the crossed keys, not any Diocesan crest I'd been briefed on. It was warm, not hot. A body kind of warm. Detroit, he said. Recipient St. Bridget of the Oaks, care of Father Ibanez. St. Bridget burned in 2019, I said, because I'm that guy and because the news cycle branded itself on me during lockdown. Electrical, condemned, the photos. Care of Father Ibanez, he repeated the way a parent repeats the only rule that matters. Direct hand, no intermediaries. The pouch is not to leave your person. If TSA insists, you call me. If anyone else insists, you walk away and you call me. If it gets active, you call me. Active. Warmth, smell, movement, he said. If you smell pennies, that counts. I had about 9 jokes loaded up for active mail. But I didn't fire any of them because Alvarez wasn't the kind of man you shoot jokes past. He turned the pouch toward me with the tines of a letter opener and nodded once. The leather felt like the inside of your elbow. It made me think of pulse points. It made me think of the first girl who'd taken my hand under a movie seat and how shocking it was that another human being could be warm exactly where you were. Flight at 1:47, he said. Carry on if you need a driver. I'll take the metro, I said. Faster than sitting on 395 pretending it moves. He cracked the smallest smile. God loves a realist. In the hallway I passed Sister Maeve, who ran ops like a blue-haired warlord in a cardigan. She slid a sandwich bag toward me without eye contact. Protein, she said. Inside were 4 pennies of different years and a stick of gum. The pennies looked like the props teacher hands you for a stage play set in 1978. I palmed the bag. Do I flip these or eat them? Smell them, she said. If the pouch smells like that, chew the gum. Focus helps. The metro was a Pacific of strangers and announcements. My seatmate's tote bag said, I vote in every election. Good for her. I kept the pouch in my lap with a hand on it like a dad who won't let the gift bag tip over. Every now and then I tapped it with my thumb, the way you tap your phone to make sure it's still yours. At Reagan, the TSA officer flagged my tray, not the pouch. A water bottle I'd forgotten. I poured it out while he glared like I'd offended the Republic. The pouch eased through the X-ray like it was born to. Gate 35 was families and a guy whisper shouting into a headset about deliverables. I found a seat under a duct that breathed cold air on my crown. I should say here, I'm not a believer in the way people mean when they say believer. I grew up in Toledo, went to Mass on Christmas and Easter, said the words, ate the wafer, nodded at the aunties. I like rituals the way I like manual transmissions. Something about knowing where the gears go calms me. But I never hung my weight on heaven. I hang my weight on what I can carry. We boarded late. We sat longer. I watched the pouch the way you watch a sleeping dog you don't actually trust. 40 minutes into the air, the woman beside me, a middle-aged black woman reading a thriller with a knife on the cover, lowered the book and sniffed once. Twice. "Do you smell copper?" she asked. Her tone said I was allowed one lie before she caused a scene. I went for honesty. "Yeah," I said, "like pennies." She nodded like we'd agreed to pretend it was the plane. Then she stood, slid her book in the seatback pocket, and walked toward the rear galley. She never came back. I waited a minute because I didn't want to be the guy who chases women into airplane bathrooms with a mysterious pouch and a worried face. Then I took the pouch and shouldered into the forward lav. The mirror showed me the version of myself I tolerate. 32 runner's shoulders, hair I try to cut myself and fail. A single red dot bloomed near my collarbone. I pressed it with a knuckle, fresh. No pain. I looked down. The pouch looked the same until it didn't. If you've ever watched a thin plastic bread bag breathe when the sun hits it just right, you know the way it lifted and settled. Not air, something heavier. Not lungs, something that remembered lungs. I held it under the fluorescent and turned it the way you turn a shell to hear what you know you'll hear. Under the leather, something threaded. Not wire, not veins. A pattern like handwriting done with a pen that can't decide if it's dry. I put it back. I washed my hands like I'd touched raw chicken. When I lifted my eyes, the red dot on my collarbone had company, 2 more, a triangle now, freckle-sized, bright. Back at my seat, the knife book woman's page number stared at me, 237. I picked up her book because it felt like the least I could do. The paragraph I landed on described a body and used the word sanguine wrong. I put it down. We landed in Detroit dusk, all pinked glass and tire smell. The airport speakers did that thing where they say your city loves you over a looping piano piece. At the rideshare stand, I did the dumb math about whether waiting for a cheaper car was worth the time, then called the first driver who'd take me to a neighborhood locals call Southwest and everybody else calls near enough to get you nervous. The driver was a man my dad's age in a tiger's cap with forearms like cast-iron skillets. He glanced in the mirror one time and said, "Package for St. Bridget." "You get a lot of that run." "Just once," he said. Then never again. The drive tasted like exhaust and winter coming early. Detroit is a city that shows you its bones without shame. Factories that stopped believing in themselves. Murals that believe for them. Block clubs that set up folding chairs like ramparts. We turned down a street where someone had turned all the stop signs into tiny shrines with plastic flowers and candle wax tears. St. Bridget sat like a woman who knew better than to ask for anybody's pity. Stone blackened up the choir windows, roof taken by fire, but somebody had swept the steps. Somebody had set candles on the landing. Somebody had taped a no trespassing, structure unstable sign to a chain-link gate and then left the gate unchained. The driver put the car in park but kept his hands on the wheel. "You want my advice, you don't want my advice," he said. "But if you wanted it, it'd be, don't go in there. I have to hand it to a Father Ibanez." He hunched his shoulders. "Then hand it fast." I stepped out into air that smelled clean and metallic at the same time, the kind of cold that looks at your jacket and laughs. The pouch had heated a little more, not hot, present, like a low fever, like a hand at the back of your neck. The front door of St. Bridget shouldn't have opened. It did, obedient as a sleepy dog. The nave smelled like soot under incense, a liturgy laid over a crime scene. The candles at the altar track flickered the way you flick your eyes at a stranger you're sure you know. I wasn't alone. 3 men stood with their backs to me in the crossing, vestments black like funeral flags. Their chant wasn't pretty. It wasn't meant to be. It sounded like a storm trying to speak on an AM radio. And there was a 4th figure, half shadow, half person, watching from the left aisle. He stepped forward like a gentleman out of an old movie. "Nathaniel Mercer," he said, using the full name only my mother deploys when she's disappointed. He had an accent you could mistake for Spanish if you wanted to be wrong. "Thank you for coming." He wore a simple black cassock and a white stole, no ornament. His face had the kind of calm that doesn't move even when the building does. "Ibanez," he said, touching his chest. "And you brought it." I lifted the pouch without stepping closer. "Black pouch, care of Father Ibanez, direct hand." The phrase came out of me with a cadence I didn't know I'd learned. Sometimes work lives in you deeper than you think. He nodded as if I'd passed a test and reached out. I didn't move. His hand hovered. "You smell it," he said, not a question. "Pennies," I said, like I bit my own tongue. His eyes softened, pity or pride, I couldn't tell. "We asked for you specifically," he said. "I figured," I said. "I do a good airline transfer." "Yes," he said, "and because your blood would answer when called." My body reacted before my mind found a word for it. The skin on my forearm went cool like I'd taken off a watch after years of wearing it. I pulled up my sleeve. Red lines had appeared without pain, 2 parallel strokes from elbow to wrist and a crossbar just below the crook. Not deep, not bleeding. New, I stared at the priests in black like one of them might apologize. No one did. Ibanez looked at my arm with a doctor's interest curdled by a pastor's sadness. "He's waking," he said softly. One of the priests turned. He was younger than me, eyes sandpapered by no sleep. He wore a thin medical kit like a sidearm. He took a step and stopped at the chalk line I hadn't noticed on the floor. The pouch in my hand throbbed once. A word pressed against the leather from the inside, a bump rising like a knuckle under skin. I didn't know the alphabet, but I knew it was writing. It pressed again, a second letter shouldering the first aside, childlike and stubborn, as if my pulse were pushing it. I swallowed. I had the unhelpful thought that I should have chewed the gum. "Don't set it down," Ibanez said. He didn't say please. "It wants the stones. It wants through. If it touches the old floor, we'll be here all night convincing it to behave." The penny smell surged. The candles lifted their flames like long necks. Outside, wind leaned into the broken glass with a sound like a stadium's audible inhale. "Say the recipient again," Ibanez said, as if names were anchors. "Say the chain of custody." "Black pouch," I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to a better man than me. "Care of Father Ibanez, direct hand, no intermediaries." The red lines on my arm brightened as if someone had traced them with a fresh marker. They connected at the wrist creases into a symbol I couldn't have drawn even with a ruler and a semester of geometry. It looked like a keyhole if keyholes had arteries. The pouch answered, a single warm knock into my palm. Not pain, recognition. You knew this would happen, I said. We hoped it would, Ibanez said. He glanced at the three in black. We prayed it wouldn't. One of the younger priests finally spoke, voice raw. Father, the clock. Ibanez looked toward the shattered transept window. Dusk had thickened into something with weight. Downstairs, he said to me. Walk with me, do not let go of the pouch. If your arm begins to bleed, let it. Let it. Better the letter reads you than the floor, he said. That stone remembers everything. There are choices you understand as you make them, and there are choices you make because motion exists and you are in it. I moved. We passed the side altar where somebody had set a plastic Mary with burn-warped eyes. We went through a sacristy whose cupboards had been emptied by either kindness or theft. Either way, the shelves were dust halos. We descended a set of narrow stairs that had no business holding 3 adult men at once, and yet they did, because churches were built to bear weight. The basement wasn't catacombs, not yet. Concrete room, paint that had peeled in long languages. A second door waited open, and the air beyond it had the oldness you get in places where salt used to be an ocean's idea about staying. The penny smell turned sweet metallic, like someone grating coins over ice. Detroit's got salt mines, Ibanez said conversationally, as if he were narrating a museum audio guide. The old parishioners used to joke that St. Bridget could season herself if she had to. The tunnels are convenient. For what? I asked, because I'm always asking the question half a beat late. Exactly. For the thing we only do when we've run out of every other thing, he said. The pouch warmed another degree. The red lines on my arm shifted under the skin, not deeper, not bleeding, rearranging like a school of fish under clear water. The symbol wanted to be a different symbol. My body wanted to let it. We reached a low corridor braced with rough timber, past a stack of broken folding chairs and a box labeled Arca workbooks, do not toss, in handwriting that made me picture an old woman with opinions. A final door wore a new padlock that had already forgotten it was new. Ibanez turned a key the size of a child's wrist, and the lock opened its mouth. Inside, a room carved from stone that had never had the sky's attention. A circle of ash and salt on the floor. A silver chalice that looked like it had already held more blood than bone marrow clinics see in a quarter. A bronze knife that didn't shine so much as it sulked. Set your feet just inside the line, Ibanez said. If you step out, we start over and we don't have time. For what? I asked again, because there is a point where repetition is courage. Exactly. He looked at me the way men look at sons they didn't know they had. For telling it no, he said. With your voice this time. The pouch jerked once like a sleeper who dropped off a curb in a dream. The word under the leather forced another letter up beside it. I couldn't read it. I could feel it, like a signature practicing itself. The first drop of blood finally pushed free at my wrist, not from the cut lines but from a pore, as if my skin had decided to cry. It ran down to my palm, touched the leather, and stopped like it had hit a friend. From somewhere above, the nave choir windows let the last of day sink. Down here, the light came from candles that didn't sputter and didn't smoke. The 3 priests in black took places at the circle's points like they had numbers we couldn't see on the floor. Ibanez stood opposite me, hands empty, eyes not. Say your name, he said. I did, and the room listened. The pouch warmed, and the letters inside it moved toward me. Behind my ribs, something that wasn't mine stirred the way someone stirs in a seat they've been offered but haven't decided to accept. Nate, Ibanez said, and my name in his mouth felt older, like Nathaniel had a grandfather in it. You'll want to run. Don't. You'll want to hand me the pouch. Don't. You'll want to close your eyes. Don't. I opened them wider because he'd told me not to close them, and because the only trick I know is to do the hard thing quickly before my body votes. Somewhere under the city, under the car plants and the Kenai Islands and the murals of saints who smoke, I heard a sound like choir practiced by men who had forgotten why they sang, and then remembered too fast. The ash-salt line tasted like a battery touched to your tongue when you're 10 and unwise. The symbol on my arm settled into a shape that felt final. Then the pouch pressed a word all the way through, a small raised scar that spelled nothing in any language I learned in school and everything in the language that lives between heartbeat and breath. And the thing in my blood answered. "Hello," it said, not in any sound a recorder could catch, but in the sudden relief of a pulse that had been holding itself back for years. I did not run. I did not hand it over. I did not close my eyes. I said, "Not today," and the circle listened, and the knives on the table were very still, and Father Ibanez finally allowed himself to look scared. I've lived in 4 apartments where the landlord swore the mail worked fine, and I've learned one rule. When an address doesn't exist, you're the one who stops existing. That thought kept circling me as I stood under St. Bridget's cracked rose window, pouch warm in my palm, blood still bright at my wrist. Father Ibanez said it like an instruction, downstairs, and my body obeyed because it was already halfway owned. The parish had burned, everyone knew that. The fire made the local news, the death toll made the regional press, and the insurance fraud rumors kept the neighborhood gossip fed for 2 winters. And yet, here were candles lit, here was incense sharp in the nose, here were priests in black whispering to a book that looked older than the city itself. St. Bridget shouldn't have been on my route. It wasn't even on the Archdiocese map anymore. I checked on my phone before I left D.C. The directory listed parish closed, no mail delivery. But my manifest had the address written in Father Alvarez's hand, neat block letters like he'd carved them with a carpenter's square. No mistakes, no wiggle, deliver here or don't come back. When I stepped into the sacristy hallway, I saw the first proof the world outside and the world inside weren't in agreement. The parish office door had a glass slot with the name etched gold, Father J. Morrison. The problem: Morrison was a priest I'd only ever heard of in training modules, a footnote about archival secrecy, not someone you were supposed to meet in a burned-out Detroit parish. The office smelled wrong, too. Not smoke, not mildew, paper cuts and pennies. The kind of smell you only notice after you've already bled. Inside, 3 more men waited. Not old priests, not cardinals. Young, tired, eyes like insomniacs who'd learned to pray instead of sleep. Black vestments, not white, not purple, not green. Just black like funeral banners. They didn't ask my name. One of them said it anyway. My full name, the way it shows up on tax documents, and the one parking ticket I never paid. He even got the middle initial right, the one I never tell people. "Mr. Nathaniel J. Mercer," the tallest one said, "thank you for carrying the letter." I hadn't shown them the pouch. I hadn't introduced myself. Still, he knew. "Chain of custody," I said, throat dry. "Black pouch, direct hand, care of Father Ibanez." I sounded like a bad actor in a courtroom drama, but the words steadied me. The pouch pulsed once as if pleased. The tall priest Morrison, I realized, nodded. He didn't smile. His eyes stayed on my wrist where the fresh cuts glowed faintly red. "You didn't open it," he said, not a question. "No," I said. "I was told not to." "Good," he murmured, "because it was already open." He lifted the pouch from my palm. The leather stuck half a second like a band-aid from skin, then gave way with a sigh I felt in my ribs. He broke the wax seal with 2 fingers. The air in the room shifted. Not colder, not warmer, thicker, like the first seconds of a thunderstorm when you know lightning's already looking for a place to land. Inside was a single folded sheet. Manila had bled dark with rust-colored stains, but the folds held sharp, precise as origami. Morrison held it up to the candles, and the words moved, not shimmered, not blurred. They rewrote themselves, fresh lines crawling like insects on bone. Dan Carpenter, Morrison read, but it wasn't my name this time. It was mine, Nate Mercer. Born May 14, 1991. Mother Margaret Ann Mercer. Father, he paused. His eyes flicked up. Father unknown. I laughed once. Wrong file. My dad's name is Gerald. He lives in Florida, spends half his pension at the dog track. Morrison's face didn't move. The man who raised you was Gerald. The man who made you was something else. The blood on my wrist burned, not pain but awareness, like a new limb had grown and demanded attention. I wanted to leave then. Every bone screamed airport cab, cheapest motel outside Wayne County, but my body wouldn't pivot, the pouch wouldn't release, because the words on the page had finished rewriting, and they weren't about the past anymore. They spelled a sentence I didn't want to see but couldn't stop reading. He wakes, he rises, he calls his children by blood, and the cuts on my arm opened wider, forming lines I didn't draw. I've lived in 4 apartments where the landlord swore the mail worked fine, and I've learned one rule. When an address doesn't exist, you're the one who stops existing. That thought kept circling me as I stood under St. Bridget's cracked rose window, pouch warm in my palm, blood still bright at my wrist. Father Ibanez said it like an instruction, downstairs, and my body obeyed because it was already halfway owned. The parish had burned, everyone knew that. The fire made the local news, the death toll made the regional press, and the insurance fraud rumors kept the neighborhood gossip fed for 2 winters. And yet, here were candles lit, here was incense sharp in the nose, here were priests in black whispering to a book that looked older than the city itself. St. Bridget shouldn't have been on my route. It wasn't even on the Archdiocese's map anymore. I checked on my phone before I left D.C. The directory listed parish closed, no mail delivery. But my manifest had the address written in Father Alvarez's hand, neat block letters like he'd carved them with a carpenter's square. No mistakes, no wiggle, deliver here or don't come back. When I stepped into the sacristy hallway, I saw the first proof the world outside and the world inside weren't in agreement. The parish office door had a glass slot with the name etched gold, Father J. Morrison. The problem: Morrison was a priest I'd only ever heard of in training modules, a footnote about archival secrecy, not someone you were supposed to meet in a burned-out Detroit parish. The office smelled wrong, too. Not smoke, not mildew, paper cuts and pennies. The kind of smell you only notice after you've already bled. Inside, 3 more men waited. Not old priests, not cardinals. Young, tired, eyes like insomniacs who'd learned to pray instead of sleep. Black vestments, not white, not purple, not green. Just black like funeral banners. They didn't ask my name. One of them said it anyway. My full name, the way it shows up on tax documents, and the one parking ticket I never paid. He even got the middle initial right, the one I never tell people. Mr. Nathaniel J. Mercer, the tallest one, said, "Thank you for carrying the letter." I hadn't shown them the pouch. I hadn't introduced myself. Still, he knew. "Chain of custody," I said, throat dry. "Black pouch, direct hand, care of Father Ibanez." I sounded like a bad actor in a courtroom drama, but the words steadied me. The pouch pulsed once as if pleased. The tall priest, Morrison, I realized, nodded. He didn't smile. His eyes stayed on my wrist where the fresh cuts glowed faintly red. "You didn't open it," he said, not a question. "No," I said. "I was told not to." "Good," he murmured, "because it was already open." He lifted the pouch from my palm. The leather stuck half a second like a band-aid from skin, then gave way with a sigh I felt in my ribs. He broke the wax seal with 2 fingers. The air in the room shifted. Not colder, not warmer, thicker, like the first seconds of a thunderstorm when you know lightning's already looking for a place to land. Inside was a single folded sheet. Manila had bled dark with rust-colored stains, but the folds held sharp, precise as origami. Morrison held it up to the candles, and the words moved. Not shimmered, not blurred. They rewrote themselves, fresh lines crawling like insects on bone. "Dan Carpenter, Morrison read, but it wasn't my name this time. It was mine, Nate Mercer. Born May 14, 1991. Mother Margaret Ann Mercer. Father," he paused. His eyes flicked up. "Father unknown." I laughed once. "Wrong file. My dad's name is Gerald. He lives in Florida, spends half his pension at the dog track." Morrison's face didn't move. "The man who raised you was Gerald. The man who made you was something else." The blood on my wrist burned, not pain but awareness, like a new limb had grown and demanded attention. I wanted to leave then. Every bone screamed airport cab, cheapest motel outside Wayne County, but my body wouldn't pivot, the pouch wouldn't release, because the words on the page had finished rewriting, and they weren't about the past anymore. They spelled a sentence I didn't want to see but couldn't stop reading. He wakes, he rises, he calls his children by blood. And the cuts on my arm opened wider, forming lines I didn't draw. Detroit has a second city underneath it. People don't talk about that, but it's true. Old salt mines run under the streets like veins, carved back when the Midwest believed in forever. Most tunnels were sealed, most maps shredded, but the church has keys where no one else should. Father Morrison led me down. Stone steps gave way to timber-braced corridors, the kind you see in documentaries about miners who never came home. My phone had no signal after the first turn. By the second, the air tasted metallic. By the third, the pouch on my chest was hotter than a radiator. I swear the tunnels had a voice. Every time our boots struck concrete, echoes didn't bounce, they answered, like something was already keeping rhythm below us. "Stay inside the chalk when you see it," Morrison warned. His voice carried like a whisper shouted inside my skull. "Salt remembers what stone forgets." That line should have scared me more than it did. But the truth, my blood already felt like it was humming along. The tunnel widened into a chamber carved out of rock, ceiling lost in shadow. Someone, maybe decades ago, maybe yesterday, had laid a circle on the floor with salt mixed with black ash. Candles lined the ring, flames steady in air that should have blown them out. At the center sat a silver chalice, too small to explain the smell of copper rolling off it, the kind of smell that makes your gums itch. Morrison gestured, and 2 of the black-vested priests lifted a bronze knife and a leather-bound book onto a stand. The third priest, a thin Asian man with a doctor's steady hands, checked gauze and needles from a medical kit. "Step inside," Morrison said. The moment my boot crossed the line, the pouch jerked once against my chest like a heartbeat. The cuts on my arm opened wider, not gushing, pouring with purpose. Blood threaded down into the dirt, tracing grooves I hadn't seen before. The chalice should have filled in seconds. Instead, it drank like a bottomless well. The more blood flowed, the more it wanted. My body should have weakened. Instead, I felt sharper, like caffeine had been injected straight into my spine. And then I heard it. Not chanting, singing. Voices too many for the 4 men in the room. Low, layered, weaving Latin syllables into something that wasn't prayer. The salt circle vibrated with it. It took me a minute to realize the voices were coming from my blood. The chalice never filled, but the stone around it darkened, soaking like cloth. I looked down at my arm. The blood wasn't random anymore. It traced sigils, perfect lines, circles, angles I couldn't draw sober. And then movement. Beyond the salt line, just past the circle's edge, someone stood. At first, I thought it was one of the priests who'd slipped outside. Same height, same shoulders, same jacket. But when he lifted his face, I knew better. It was me. Older, sharper, smiling in a way I've never smiled. Like he knew the punchline to a joke I'd die before I understood. And as the choir in my veins rose louder, the other me opened his mouth and spoke my name. They called it a knife, but it looked more like something hammered out of a star. Bronze, dulled to green in the grooves, but carved with symbols that made my eyes water if I looked too long. Not Christian crosses, not Hebrew letters, older, angrier. Father Morrison lifted it with 2 hands, careful as if it could cut him without moving. "This is the severance blade," he said. "It's been waiting longer than your family's bloodline." I should have run. I should have told him to keep his museum piece and his secret choir underground. But I didn't move, because the truth, the pouch at my chest wasn't letting me. It pulsed like a second heart. And my blood, God help me, wanted to see what happened next. The priests began their chant again, low and grinding, syllables that sounded like stone collapsing in slow motion. The salt circle flared white. The bronze knife glowed faintly, the same shade as my blood pooling in the chalice. Morrison didn't stab me, he cut himself first. A shallow line across his palm, crimson dripping into the chalice. Then the young Asian priest, Father Park, followed. His blood swirled with Morrison's, mixing but not mixing, like oil sliding over water. Finally, the last priest, Costa, added his, lips trembling as he whispered words I didn't recognize. The chalice never filled. Instead, it drank deeper, as though it were less a cup and more a throat. My blood joined theirs, black-red, shimmering like it wanted to climb out. Morrison's voice carried over the chanting. "By blood freely given, by choice freely made, we deny you in trance." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a ritual to bind something out. It was a contract written in me. My veins burned. The cuts on my arm writhed, not bleeding but rearranging themselves into new sigils. The pouch bucked against my ribs like an animal in a trap. And across the circle, the other version of me, the one smiling in the dark, laughed without sound. The candle flames exploded upward, 3 feet high, cold blue fire that painted the stone walls in shadows that didn't belong to us. The air ripped open. That's the only way I can describe it, like space itself tore along a seam no one else could see. Something pressed against the salt line, not my double anymore, not human, meat and teeth, eyes stacked where they didn't belong, a geometry that felt wrong to look at. The severance knife pulsed in Morrison's grip. The chalice shook like it would shatter. My blood raced faster, writing symbols across my arm I couldn't stop, and the thing beyond the line leaned close enough for me to smell it. Old copper, wet earth, and something that smelled like home. Then it whispered in my own voice, "Say yes." And for half a second I almost did. I woke up 3 days later. White concrete walls, no windows, a steel door with a slit of reinforced glass. A hospital, but not the kind Blue Cross covers. Father Park sat in a chair beside the bed reading a medical journal. When he noticed I was awake, he didn't say "thank God" or "you're safe now." He just flipped the page, calm as if we'd both agreed I wasn't entirely human anymore. My throat felt like sandpaper. "Did it work?" I croaked. Park hesitated, and in that silence I realized nobody in the room was celebrating. "Yes and no," he finally said. "The entity can't use you as a doorway anymore, but the process." He trailed off like a doctor about to tell a patient the cancer's gone but the cure was worse. He handed me a chart, my blood work. I couldn't read half the numbers, but one thing stood out in black marker: blood type, unknown. My type was O positive, I said. "Not anymore." Park slid a microscope video toward me. Normal red cells floated round and smooth. Then he showed mine, crystalline, angular, moving in deliberate patterns. "Your blood doesn't act like blood anymore," he said. "It organizes, it listens." That night Morrison and a woman in a government suit came in. She introduced herself as Agent Fuller, Department of Ecclesiastical Investigations. Half FBI, half Vatican, all stone face. She laid out papers like a probation officer explaining parole conditions. Rule 1, no blood donations, no transfusions, ever. Rule 2, no children, your genetics are unstable. Rule 3, no contact with relics or blessed artifacts without supervision. Your blood reacts violently. Rule 4, regular medical check-ins. Weekly, then monthly if you stabilize. She looked me in the eye. "If you degrade, if you start to become what we saw in the circle, we won't hesitate, understood?" The rules sounded clinical, bureaucratic, but every one of them was a leash. A way of admitting they didn't trust me, couldn't trust me, and the worst part, neither could I, because every time I blinked I felt the cuts on my arm pulsing like they were spelling words only my blood could read. They moved me into a safe house with other cases. Survivors, witnesses, people the church didn't want in public. The first night, I stood in the bathroom brushing my teeth. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, everything perfectly normal, until I looked in the mirror. Not my face, though that already looked grayer, hollower, but my shadow. It wasn't brushing its teeth with me. It wasn't in sync. It was standing behind me, hands at its side, watching. And when I turned, there was nothing there. But in the mirror, my shadow smiled first. The safe house wasn't a house. It was a 6-story apartment block on the edge of Cleveland, wrapped in chain link and cameras, every window wired with sensors. From the outside, it looked abandoned. Inside, it felt like a dorm for people who shouldn't exist. They gave me a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor. Neutral beige walls, furniture that looked government-issued, fridge already stocked with protein packs and bottled water. The first night my neighbor knocked. She introduced herself as Grace. Late 40s, ex-nun. Her eyes looked swollen, not from crying but from something stranger. "You'll get used to it," she said. "The strangeness, the rules, the nights." Then without warning her eyes watered red. She dabbed with a tissue, except it wasn't tears. It was blood, thin streams running from her ducts like she'd been crying for a funeral no one else attended. She smiled like it was normal. "It happens every few days. Nothing to worry about." And somehow I believed her. For the first week I followed the rules, ate the food, drank the water, took the meds Father Park handed me. Little white pills he claimed were antipsychotics but burned in my throat like consecrated wine. But food didn't taste right. Water tasted metallic, meat tasted like cardboard, bread tasted like nothing. Every bite left me emptier than before. The first real hunger hit me on day 9. It wasn't in my stomach. It was in my bones, in my teeth, in the back of my throat. A gnawing ache that whispered, you need warmth, you need blood. That night, a storm cut power across the block. I stood at my window in the dark and saw the city glow, every light a heartbeat. And I swear I could hear them, thousands of pulses rushing through my ears like drums. Then someone knocked at my door. A college kid, lost in the storm, soaking wet, said he'd gotten turned around on the trail. "Phone's dead," he said. "Can I call a ranger?" I let him in, gave him water, and the whole time I could smell him, not his clothes, not his cologne, his blood. It smelled like copper and citrus, sweet, alive. My new teeth ached. My fingers twitched. I locked myself in the bathroom until the rangers picked him up. To stop myself from lunging at him, I bit my own hand so hard my teeth cracked bone. It healed in minutes. The pain was the only thing that kept me human. After they left, I sat shaking in the dark, staring at the bite mark that had already closed. The mirror showed nothing wrong except my eyes. They weren't just darker. They reflected no light at all. And that's when I heard it. Not outside, not through the wall, inside my blood. A voice, low and familiar, whispering the same 3 words again and again. Feed or fade. 2 weeks into the safe house, Agent Fuller called me down to the basement. The air smelled like bleach and damp concrete. Against the far wall sat a locked steel cabinet with the Vatican's insignia stamped into the door. Not the crossed keys you'd recognize, but a version older, sharper, with symbols etched around the rim like warnings. Fuller slid me a manila folder. You should know what you are, or at least what came before you. Inside were thin files, 14 of them, each with a photo paperclip to the top corner. Black and white mugshots, faded Polaroids, a few grainy DMV headshots. Every one of them looked ordinary: teachers, construction workers, nurses, a priest, even a high school student, and everyone had survived the severance ritual. At first, file after file ended the same way. Subject #3, self-immolation inside a cathedral, body found fused to altar. Subject #7, disappeared, reappeared 6 months later during an exorcism in Iowa. Eyes entirely black, terminated by task force. Subject #9, jumped from a 12th-story apartment window, survived the fall without broken bones, then tore her own throat out in front of paramedics. Subject #12, lasted 10 years. Cause of death listed as cardiac arrest, but a handwritten addendum read, Type 7 manifestation, home burned with subject inside. Out of 14, none lived what anyone would call a normal life. Some went quick. Some dragged it out, but they all ended in fire, blood, or disappearance. Park, who had been silent until now, finally said, "The ritual never really works, it just buys time." Fuller added, "You lasted longer than most already." I looked down at my own file. The page wasn't finished. Blank spaces under outcome, boxes waiting to be filled in. At the bottom of the cabinet was a single redacted report stamped with scarlet ink, clearance, cardinal level. Most of the paragraphs were blacked out, but one line was left visible. Operation Gathering authorized. My stomach went cold. "What's gathering?" I asked. No one answered. Park shut the folder. Fuller locked the cabinet. But when I stood, I realized my arm was bleeding again, fresh sigils etching across my skin, spelling something in a language I didn't know. And in the reflection of the cabinet glass, I saw not one of me, but 14, all of them staring back, all of them smiling like they knew what came next. Father Alex came for me after midnight. The young priest who'd once driven me to the airport, the one with dark circles carved under his eyes. He didn't knock, didn't ask, just whispered through the door, "Come, you need to see." We walked down 2 flights past the boiler room to a steel door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The handle was cold enough to sting my palm. Inside was a morgue. 3 stainless steel tables lined with sheets pulled over bodies. The room smelled of bleach and copper and something sweeter underneath, like fruit left to rot. Alex pulled the first sheet back. I saw myself. Not exactly older, gray-skinned, teeth too sharp, but close enough that I knew this was what waited if I slipped. "This is what you would have become," Alex said, "what you still might." He pulled the second sheet. Another me. Same hollow cheeks, same eyes sunken black. But this one had carved symbols into its own chest, deep slashes that looked ritualistic, like tic-tac-toe for demons. "Self-inflicted," Alex murmured. "They tried to finish the ritual on their own. It killed them in hours." The third sheet came last. My stomach clenched before he even touched it. When the cloth slid away, I saw my face again, jaw torn wide open, throat shredded by its own hands. "They died the same night you survived," Alex said. "Starved when the bond was cut." The entity's voice silenced. They couldn't stand the emptiness. He leaned against the table, eyes hollow. "You trapped them when you said no, left them cut off, hungry. They died cursing your name. I should have felt pity or horror, but instead I felt something colder, something I didn't want to name. And when I whispered, the words surprised even me." "Good." Alex studied me. "No sympathy, no connection. Should I?" I asked. "3 weeks ago you would have. That's how I know you're changing." He covered the bodies, turned to leave. But before he reached the door, a phone on the counter buzzed. No one touched it. No one had left it there. Still, the screen lit with a call. The caller ID froze my blood, my name, my number. The phone kept buzzing. The morgue filled with the sound, each vibration echoing off steel like a heartbeat. And then, faint through the static speaker, my own voice whispered, "Come home." I wasn't supposed to have it. Agent Fuller would have called it evidence or contraband. But when she visited last week, she left the consecrated knife on the table for 2 minutes too long. 2 minutes was all I needed. It was a simple thing, short blade, stainless steel, a cross engraved on the hilt. But it was the kind of weapon priests whispered about in training. Consecrated steel could cut where bullets failed, could make the possessed scream even before the blade touched flesh. That night, I locked the bathroom door, sat on the cold tile floor, and pressed the edge against my palm. My reflection in the mirror above the sink looked like a man trying to prove he still existed. 1 slice, quick. Blood welled, bright red for a second. Then the glow shifted. My blood crystallized, darkening to a rust-colored shimmer, like fragments of stained glass tumbling in my veins. The cut sealed in less than a breath. Smooth skin, no scar, no smoke. I stared at the knife in disbelief. All the church's weapons, their safeguards, the centuries of faith forged into steel, and my body didn't care. The next day I tried something worse. Grace, my neighbor, the ex-nun with bleeding eyes, was blessing a pitcher of water in the kitchen. I watched her dip her fingers, whisper the prayer, cross herself with trembling hands. She gave me a tired smile, left the pitcher on the counter, and walked back to her apartment. The moment the door shut, I poured a glass. I expected pain, fire in my throat, smoke curling out of my lungs. Instead, the water was cool, refreshing, almost sweet. It steamed faintly when it touched my tongue, but not with anger, with welcome. By the third sip, the gnawing hunger in my bones dulled for the first time in days. I drained the glass. When Grace came back, she froze, the pitcher half empty, my eyes staring back at her from the reflection in the glass, too dark, too empty. Her lips moved around a prayer. "That's not possible," she whispered, but it was, and worse, it felt right. That night I couldn't stop shaking. The knife hadn't worked. The holy water had fed me. Everything that should have burned me only pulled me deeper in. I pulled the old files from under my bed, the 14-case histories Fuller had let me glimpse. My hands itched. My veins hummed. Without meaning to, I picked up a pen and started to draw. Lines, circles, cross hatches. At first it looked like scribbles, but the longer I worked, the more sense it made. When I leaned back, I realized it wasn't random at all. It was a map. Not roads, not subway lines, a lattice of churches. Every parish, every chapel, every burned cathedral in Detroit connected into a single sigil. And at the center, circled over and over by my own hand, was St. Bridget's, the burned church, the place where all of this began. I dropped the pen, but the map didn't stop glowing. The lines crawled up my arm, burning faint red like veins of fire under the skin. And then I felt it. Not hunger, not fear, something worse. A call. I wasn't being hunted anymore. I was being summoned back. Detroit has seen a lot: riots, fires, blackouts, bankruptcies. But it has never seen money fall from the sky. It started on a Thursday afternoon. I was staring out the safe house window when the storm rolled in. Not rain, not hail, pennies. Thousands of them pelting cars, rooftops, sidewalks. The sound was like gunfire softened by velvet. People rushed outside, laughing at first, scooping up handfuls. But then the laughter stopped, because every coin smelled like blood. Not faint, not metallic like you get from handling change. Real blood, copper and salt and meat. Some of the coins were still warm. Grace looked at me, her bleeding eyes wide. "It's them," she whispered. "It's starting." That night the power grid flickered across half the city. Streetlights didn't go out, they glowed steady, too steady, like they weren't running on electricity anymore. I stepped outside into air so heavy it made my ears pop. The clouds had split into veins of red lightning, tracing sigils across the horizon. And then I heard it. Not thunder, chanting. Low and layered like choirs stacked one on top of another, but no one was singing. The sound came from the storm itself. My arm burned. The glowing map I'd drawn without knowing flared again, lines on my skin syncing perfectly with the lightning overhead. Every parish in Detroit was humming. The whole city had become one body, one ritual, and my blood was keeping time. The chanting grew louder, syllables breaking into words, my name. The sky said it over and over, booming so hard the pavement rattled. Nate Mercer. Windows cracked, dogs howled. Every person on the street looked up, terrified, hearing a name they didn't recognize, but I did. And the worst part, my mouth moved with the storm. I wasn't just hearing my name, I was answering. St. Bridget should have been a corpse. Every report, every photo, every neighbor in that neighborhood would swear the fire gutted her down to black bones of stone and ash. But the night after the copper storm, I saw it glowing on the horizon. I walked for miles, through streets littered with blood-stinking pennies until I reached the corner lot. The chain-link fence was still there, still sagging under no trespassing signs. But beyond it, the church was alive. Candles burned in every window. Warm yellow light spilled onto cracked pavement. The rose window, which had been shattered into jagged teeth, now glowed whole, stained glass repaired by hands no human had. A car slowed as it passed me. The driver rolled down his window. "That place burned, man," he said, wide-eyed. "It's been dead for years." "Not tonight," I whispered. I slipped through the loose gate and stepped onto consecrated ground. It should have burned me. Park's file said survivors of the ritual combusted on blessed earth, their blood boiling until nothing remained. Sister Catherine had died that way, 3 hours of fire from the inside out. But me, nothing. The dirt crunched beneath my boots. The holy ground accepted me like I belonged. The closer I got to the front doors, the hotter the pouch against my chest grew, even though I hadn't carried it in weeks. My veins pulsed with light, faint red glowing under my skin. When I pushed the door, it opened without resistance. No locks, no chains, no hesitation. Inside, the nave was scrubbed clean. No soot, no broken pews. The air smelled of incense and something sharper, metallic, like the storm had seeped in here too. And in the choir loft, half hidden by shadow, figures watched me. Not parishioners, not priests, something in between. Their faces were pale, stretched, eyes too wide, smiles frozen in masks like vestments carved into flesh. And when I stepped further in, their voices rose, chanting my name in perfect unison. I turned to leave, pulse hammering, but the great wooden doors behind me slammed shut. The iron bolt slid into place on its own. The chanting from the loft grew louder, faster. The cadence of a liturgy I almost recognized, but twisted just enough to break something in my ears. And when I looked back up, every masked face had tilted down toward me. They didn't blink, and they didn't have to, because I knew what they were waiting for. Me. The safe house gave me journals, blank composition books with cardboard covers, cheap pens for therapeutic writing. Fuller thought it might keep me sane. Morrison said it might let the blood speak safely. For weeks I ignored them. Then one night after St. Bridget relit itself, I sat at the desk and picked up a pen. My hand moved before my head did. The lines came fast, sharp, not cursive, not block, something in between. I told myself I was just scribbling, just releasing nerves. But when I blinked, there it was, a letter, folded neat on the page, sealed with my own blood dripping from my wrist, and the envelope already had an address, to Nathaniel J. Mercer. I tried to rip the page out, burn it, flush it down the sink. The paper wouldn't tear, the flame wouldn't catch. The water rolled off like the ink was oiled skin. Then on my bed, God help me, the black pouch appeared, the one I had delivered months ago. The one that should have been locked in Vatican archives. It pulsed faintly, as if breathing. I didn't open it. I didn't need to, because the letter I had just written was no longer in my journal. It was in the pouch, waiting. The seal red wax, same unknown sigil, was already pressed as if I'd done it in my sleep. I turned the envelope over and felt my stomach cave. It was addressed not to Cleveland, not to Detroit, not to any church. It was addressed to my apartment, the one I was sitting in. The letter was written to me from me. I tried not to look at the bottom corner, but I couldn't help it. There was a timestamp in dried blood, not 6 months ago, not yesterday, 6 hours from now, meaning the letter hadn't just been written, it was still being written. And if it was delivered on time, it would arrive to me by me. The pouch pulsed in my lap, hot and insistent. My arm burned. Somewhere in the walls, I heard footsteps that weren't Grace's, weren't Park's, weren't Fuller's. A knock came at my door, 3 times, soft, familiar, and then my own voice muffled through the wood. Package for Nathaniel Mercer, direct hand, no intermediaries. The letter said 6 hours. I didn't wait in my room, I walked. Detroit's streets were alive in a way I'd never seen. Not with people, most had locked themselves inside, but with silence that moved. Stoplights stayed green too long, alleys pulsed like throats swallowing, street lamps hummed in unison. And then I saw them. Not priests, not demons, people. Ordinary on first glance, nurses, welders, a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, a man in a factory jacket. But every single one of them carried the same wrongness I did. Their skin too gray, their eyes reflecting no light, their movements half a beat behind their shadows. They looked at me like family, and for the first time I realized I wasn't alone. We gathered in an abandoned lot 2 blocks from St. Bridget's. No one spoke. No one had to. One by one they began to hum. Low, vibrating, not a melody but a litany. A sound I recognized from the tunnels, from my own blood. And then, without meaning to, I joined. The vibration crawled through my ribs, set my teeth on edge. The asphalt beneath us cracked, lines forming patterns like veins of fire. The city itself was answering. A man beside me, his fingernails grown into black points, opened his mouth. The litany poured out in words in a tongue that wasn't human, but I could still understand. Not man, not demon, not forgotten. We are the in-between. The rest repeated it over and over, a chorus of broken souls finding rhythm, and my voice was the loudest. The ground shook. Across the lot, the burned frame of St. Bridget's pulsed like a heart. The stained glass windows, whole again, throbbed with light in time to our chant. I thought it was him, the entity my bloodline had been tied to. I thought we were summoning our father. But when the litany reached its peak, I felt it. It wasn't his song. It was ours. The entity had lost its hold. The church had lost control. We were creating something new, something not bound by their rules, not bound by holy water, not bound by bloodlines. And in that realization came terror, because if we weren't his children and we weren't human anymore, what were we becoming? The chanting stopped. Everyone in the lot turned toward me, eyes glowing faint red, and spoke in one voice. Lead us. St. Bridget's doors opened like they'd been waiting for us. The nave was spotless, candles burning in rows too neat for human hands. The air smelled of ash and incense, but sweeter, like copper dust carried on rain. We filled the pews, dozens of us, maybe more. No choir robes, no vestments, just gray skin and black eyes staring at an altar that shouldn't have existed anymore. I walked down the center aisle. No one told me to. No one had to. The moment I reached the altar, every candle flame bent toward me like reeds in wind. That's when I realized we weren't here for mass. We were here to write one. The litany began low, voices humming, shaking dust loose from the rafters. My veins itched until I bled without cutting, red sigils crawling up my arms and neck. The others followed, bleeding, glowing, humming. The blood pooled into channels carved deep into the floor, grooves I swear hadn't been there before. The liquid ran like mercury, spelling symbols none of us had learned, yet all of us understood. The candles flared. Blue-white flames leapt high, climbing the pillars, racing up the walls. But when they touched us, when the cold fire licked our faces and hands, it didn't burn, it soothed. The girl in the front pew reached into the flame and laughed. Her skin smoked, but instead of blistering, it hardened, luminous like glass-catching moonlight. The man beside her wept, not from pain but release. And the whole time the fire whispered in 1,000 voices, not his, not theirs, yours. When the flames reached the dome, they closed into a cage of light, sealing us in. The chanting grew, the ground shook, and somewhere above us, bells began to toll, though the tower had been gutted years ago. I felt something tear in my chest, not pain but liberation. My blood surged faster, hotter, until it spilled from my nose and eyes, dripping onto the altar. And when it hit the stone, letters formed. My name, not carved, not painted, written in my own blood across the altar, glowing. Then right before my eyes it began to fade. Letter by letter my name disappeared. When the last letter vanished, the entire church went silent, and every voice, hundreds of voices, spoke in unison, not chanting, not humming, but declaring, "You are no longer Nathaniel Mercer." The night after St. Bridget's erased my name, Detroit stopped feeling like a city and started feeling like a body. Streetlights didn't just shine, they stared. Every bulb buzzed steady, unblinking, like an eye that refused to close. Car headlights froze on green lights, engines idling but drivers unable to move until the signal released them. On the Safe House TV, every channel flickered the same static for 5 seconds, then showed me. Not in real time, not surveillance, images of me walking, praying, bleeding, laughing. Moments I didn't remember living. Grace banged on my door that night, tears of blood streaming faster than I'd ever seen. "It's not just you anymore," she said. "The city sees us, it sees all of us." Park dragged me into the monitoring room in the basement. Dozens of screens showed traffic cams, satellite feeds, neighborhood footage. All of Detroit was lighting up. Not just random lights, patterns. Entire blocks pulsed on and off in sequence, like circuits firing in a brain. On one map overlay, the glowing streets traced lines I knew too well, the sigil my blood had drawn nights ago. Only now it was complete. Every church, every cross street, every abandoned parish had locked into place, forming a city-wide lattice. And in the center, the brightest pulse was St. Bridget's. "Detroit is becoming an altar," Park whispered. His voice shook like a man seeing the end of a world he believed in. And then one of the screens changed. Not a camera feed, not a map. A phrase written in white letters across black. "Litany accepted." Sirens wailed across the city, not police, not ambulances, but deeper, older, like air raid horns echoing out of the river itself. Everyone on the monitors, pedestrians, drivers, people in apartments, stopped moving. They looked up in unison, eyes wide, unblinking. And then in the room with us, every fluorescent light flared, and a dozen voices whispered from nowhere, layered and identical. "Lead them." My skin crawled because it wasn't just the in-betweens anymore. The city itself was speaking. And it wanted me in charge. Detroit fell silent at midnight. Not the kind of silence you get from sleeping neighborhoods, but the silence of a held breath. No cars moved, no trains ran, even the river froze, surface stiff like glass. But the city wasn't dead, it was praying. Every streetlight pulsed in rhythm. Every traffic light switched red at once. Skyscraper windows glowed in sequence, spelling lines across the skyline. From above, if you could have seen it, the city wasn't a grid anymore. It was a sigil. And I was standing in the middle of it, St. Bridget's, the black heart that had burned but refused to die. Inside, the pews overflowed with the in-betweens. Gray skin, black eyes, shadows moving wrong. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, everyone silent, waiting for me. I stepped up to the altar. My veins opened without knives. Blood streamed freely, painting the floor, tracing the grooves carved into the stone. The red spread outward like roots drinking deep, linking me to every light, every building, every unblinking eye in the city. And then it began, the litany. Not his song, not the church's hymn, ours. The in-betweens chanted, voices layered until the rafters shook. Cold fire rose from the pew's blue-white flames curling around us, wrapping the church in a dome of living light. The stained glass windows bled, not color, not glass, blood. It ran down the panes like tears. The bell tower, long collapsed, tolled once, deep and thunderous, though no metal remained. The Mass had begun, and I wasn't just attending, I was officiating. When the chant reached its peak, I felt it tear through me. Not pain, transformation. My human name was gone. My blood wrote something else across the altar, letters that twisted and shifted too fast to hold. The others looked at me, waiting, not as followers, but as pieces of me, extensions of one body. And for the first time, I understood. This wasn't about resisting the entity, or the church, or fate. This was evolution, a species crawling out of its old skin. The city roared, buildings groaned like bones shifting. Lights pulsed faster, faster, until the whole skyline flickered like a beating heart. And in that heartbeat, in that last human moment, I recorded this. If you're hearing my words, it means I've already gone. Detroit isn't a city anymore. It's a body, and I'm its voice.